Emperor Augustus really was a political genius. He knew who were the best people to join forces with at the right time. He had an eye for who would be loyal to him and who would be just a temporary ally, and he knew the right time to switch between the civil, magnanimous heir of Caesar, the friend of all Romans, and the cold, calculating first emperor of Rome, with dozens of legions by his side and no reserves, to being as ruthless as possible to be the uncontested leader of Rome. Of course, this talent in politics also translated to the propaganda he put on coins, on the quality of the propaganda, the only true mass media the Romans had available to them. Today I bring you a small assortment of coins issued during the early to mid-reign of Augustus. Let's see what kinds of messages he passed on them. This was a time that required a tactful approach to politics. Push too hard and the people, or God forbid the army, could consider you a tyrant, a would-be king, and the Romans did not like the idea of a monarch. On the other hand, be too soft, and the old powers of the Republican elites and their potential of coming up with their own armies might consider pushing you out, seeking to restore the old order. This wasn't really a problem only Augustus had to face, but one of the constant threats to any Roman emperor. They always had someone potentially plotting against them. Augustus treaded this line very well, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to so effectively concentrate power on his hands as he did. Paradoxically, the coins I'm showing you today were not issued in Rome, the capital, but rather at imperial mints in Gaul and Hispania, regions that were part of Rome's sphere of influence for some time. In fact, some parts of Hispania were in Roman hands for centuries by that time, but there were areas that were still being fully integrated to the empire during Augustus's time. There are quite a few reasons why Augustus preferred to produce his precious metal coins outside of Rome. You see, previously, and what I mean by previously is like the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC and probably the first decades of the 1st century BC, so actually quite a long stretch of time back. Coins were issued under the close control of the Roman Senate. The Senate understood that the authority to make coins and pay soldiers gave whoever controlled it immense power. That's why the prerogatives of issuing money were always spread out between the entire senatorial class. It wasn't a concentrated thing. And this week's episode is kindly sponsored by L5, the new online marketplace for ancient coins. L5 is a platform that focuses on trust, transparency, and low fees. It is an environment where you can safely buy coins to add to your collection, knowing every item listed has been vetted by specialists, with a lifetime guarantee of authenticity, and the new system of online bidding that ensures fair, transparent bidding. No sniping, no shield bids, just a fair trading environment for buyers and sellers. L5's proposal is to eliminate all uncertainties beginners and experienced collectors alike might have when buying a coin, while offering a low-cost service with no listing fees and a buyer's premium of just 5%. Make sure to check out L5.com for what I believe is a new platform that the ancient coin market was in need for. However, things changed during the last few decades of the Republic, so we're talking about the second half of the 1st century BC. Control of the issue of money started to slip out of the Senate's hands. Strongmen such as Sulla, Caesar, Pompey, Mark Antony, and then even Octavian, the future Augustus, they all used the same argument that they had to fight to save the Republic. So they simply decided to skip the established due process of asking the Senate to issue coins and then hand out the necessary budget for a designated general to raise an army and fight for the Republic that they were supposed to be saving. Instead, these men just got a hold of their personal fortunes, and in some instances they took hold of public treasuries, they struck their own coins and raised their own armies. Armies that were, and this is key, they were first loyal to them and only secondarily loyal to the Roman Republic. Augustus understood, because of the situation, the value of holding a monopoly on the striking of precious metal coins. So when he reformed the Roman monetary standard in the year 23 BC, he ensured the emperor's authority was the one behind the issuing of new precious metal coins, relegating the Senate to issuing base metal coins just for local commerce. At first glance, this might look like a simple division of tasks, so no entity would be over-encumbered with too many things to take care of, but how convenient it was that the issue of precious metal coins, the valuable ones, the ones that the troops received as payment, were concentrated on the hands of the emperor. That man was really smart. He really knew how to take care of power on the things that mattered. Another change enacted by Augustus was a move to heavily monetize Rome's territories, with a particular emphasis of increasing the use of coins in the provinces. He gave permission to many local mints to produce their own coins for local circulation to make commerce easier. And as long, of course, that these coins were they made a reference on their designs to his authority. He also granted a few of these cities, generally capitals of important provinces, permission to strike provincial silver issues to facilitate large-scale commerce. These places were most of the times already important economic hubs even before the arrival of Rome, and they had well-established monetary systems, which Augustus allowed to continue existing, as long as, once again, they adopted an imagery more in line with Roman ideals. However, one of his most unique moves was to open imperial mints under his direct control, meant to issue his silver denarii and gold auri in these strategic locations far from Rome. So, enough talk. Let's actually look at some coins while we continue talking. Let's begin with Hispania. The term Hispania is more of a reference to the entire Iberian Peninsula, so what is modern-day Spain and Portugal, but under Augustus it was divided in 3 provinces: Baetica, Lusitania, and Tarraconensis. Today's coins were issued in Colonia Patricia, located at the southernmost province of Baetica. If you ever have a chance to visit Spain, Colonia Patricia is the modern-day city of Cordoba. It's an absolute jewel of a city, full of history and with plenty of Roman ruins within its urban center, including a massive Roman bridge. And the area around its vicinity is also dotted with ruins and interesting things to see. So, Hispania was easy to defend due to its geography, and it actually took centuries for the Romans to fully conquer it. But once they had it locked down, it was a very profitable region for the imperial coffers and one of its most important producers of olive oil. And you know how important olive oil was for a Roman, not only in his diet, but for many other uses. So let's begin with this denarius, struck between 19 and 18 BC. The obverse of all of today's coins are quite similar, so I'll go more in detail on this one and I'll glance over the other two. The portraiture on most coins of Augustus is surprisingly simple, straightforward. My first reaction to it was that this was actually like a missed opportunity. After all, this was a wonderful way of the emperor to advertise his official positions, because the Romans put a lot of emphasis on their public careers, on the titles that you held and how much you served the Roman people. This was essential for the respectability of your gens, your family. So it surprised me that we can only, most of the times we only find stuff like Caesar Augustus, like we have on this coin. Not even like his full regnal name. However, think about it. The 2 names that really mattered to get the message across were the ones boldly written here. Caesar, after all, he was the heir of Julius Caesar, which was still pretty alive in collective memory, and Augustus, his new special title, which conferred him the special powers that the emperor or the Augusti would have in this new system, this new imperial system that was theoretically still a republic, but was more and more transitioning into something more in line with a monarchy. This makes the denarii struck under Augustus surprisingly clean looking. They're very concise on their message. They don't give more information that is absolutely necessary, but they transmit very clearly the information that matters the most. His portrait, how he looked like, or even better, how he wanted to be imagined, because his portrait never changed, always looking like this relatively young, fresh adult that we see here, even on coins that were made when he was in his 70s. And for the legends, just a few words that made it very clear that he was the one in charge. The reverses, however, were very diverse, taking advantage of absolutely every single public ceremony dedicated to him, every monument, military victory, connection to the divine. His coinage is an exhaustive list of all of the honors bestowed upon him. It serves not only for us today as a wonderful registry to his accolades, but it also served back then as a way to establish this Imperial Cult, this concept that the emperor was a man, yes, but he was larger than life, he was special, he was the princeps, the first citizen, the Augustus, the exalted one. And we can see it so clearly that the coins were a very important vector for his public image. Let's start with this example. Here we have references to two events in the early days of his reign. First, to the left and right, we have two military standards. These were carried by the legions into battle to help identify different cohorts in the chaos of the battlefield. For a Roman legion to lose its main standard in battle, captured by the enemy, was a great dishonor. And during the last decades of the Republic, Rome engaged in a series of wars with the Parthians, its neighbors to the east. The conflicts were ultimately inconclusive, but Rome suffered some pretty serious losses, particularly when Crassus was defeated in 53 BC, in which many standards were captured. Augustus chose to engage in diplomacy with the Parthians rather than taking the standards back by force, and of course he proudly displayed the recovered standards in Rome, showing the honor of the legions had been restored. This is what the legends in this reverse make reference to. Signis receptis, meaning the returned standards. The central round object at the center is a shield, a gold shield, given to Augustus by the Senate, in a display of, let's say, their allegiance. It was called the Clipeus Virtutis, the shield of virtue, the shield of valor. And as we can see for the four letters around it, SPQR, it was dedicated to him as a gift from the Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. A wonderful coin, really. The next coin was produced a year later, in 18 BC. We have a small variation on the obverse. Now, instead of the bear head, Augustus wears the laurel crown, which will become so common on later coins of the imperial period. Curiously, the legends here they're spelled in a different way, they're in the dative case. So while the previous coin could be translated to Caesar Augustus as indicating who was being shown on the coin, this one translates differently. It was to Caesar Augustus as meant to him, dedicated to him. The different choice of words is, frankly, it's anyone's guess, really. On the reverse, we have a temple. The construction of temples was a major statement of power for any Roman emperor. At first, it might seem like just one big manifestation of one's ego, but building a temple served many purposes. First, of course, it is this gigantic structure right at the center of the capital of the empire, built, paid for, and gifted to the people by you, and meant to represent some accomplishment of yours, but it also served as a great opportunity to increase your popularity, as these construction projects employed a number of Rome's poor inhabitants. This was a way to distribute money down to the lower strata of society, which helped a lot in maintaining order and social stability in, imagine that, a city of around 1 million people, while getting something out of it instead of simply doing charity for charity's sake. There's also the religious aspect of it. The Roman gods were very capricious. The idea of maintaining the pax deorum, the peace of the gods, which meant not only avoiding the wrath of the gods, but actually getting their blessings, getting their favor, was an important aspect of the public image of an emperor. Most of the times he was the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest. So, for example, if you were about to face an important battle, of course, you were supposed to ask the gods to be on your side. In the case of this reverse, Augustus is thanking the god Mars, the god of war, for his many victorious campaigns. Augustus himself was not the best soldier in the world, but it is true that he had plenty of competent generals by his side, most notably his lifelong friend Agrippa, so maybe he was indirectly blessed by Mars. So here we see the image of the temple dedicated to Mars that was built in Rome, and inside of it we see a triumphal chariot, one which emperors would triumphantly enter the city after a major victory. And over the chariot we can once more see the standards recovered from the Parthians. It's quite cool to see how this coin talks to the previous one. After all, they were struck around the same time, just 1 year apart, so they would have circulated together on the markets. How well thought out, no? Not only the individual reverses were interesting, but the Romans also took in consideration that there were other coins in circulation, and they made sure that they communicated with one another in this larger type of message that couldn't be passed with a single coin. And for our third coin of Colonia Patricia, we have this one, struck in 17 BC. Once again, we have the bust of Augustus. However, this time the design is even simpler. We basically have his head without any legends. Now, notice how different the style of the portrait is compared to the other two previous coins. I'll let you pause the video and look at the previous ones again to compare them. I mean, the features of his face, the hair, the proportions, I think they look quite different. Maybe even too different. Let me elaborate. There are some arguments of where these Spanish denarii were minted. The leading theory is Colonia Patricia, or modern-day Cordoba. That's what I'm using as the quote-unquote canonical attribution, but some claim these could have been minted in Caesar Augusta, modern-day Zaragoza, on northeast Spain, very far from Cordoba. Personally, I think certain portraits like this one are so different from the other two we've seen that the idea that there could have been two operating mints in these two places, it could be plausible. The other alternative explanation is that only one of these proposed cities made the coin, either one or the other, but there was a certain discrepancy in the style of portraits, depending on which die engraver made the actual dies. Normally, a mint had more than one engraver, so there was some difference in style between different dies, but their style was at least somewhat similar. Most mints throughout the imperial period clearly show signs of different engravers, but they all follow a certain visual trend for their mints. So it could be, that's just a theory of mine, that this Spanish mint just didn't have its engravers line up their portraiture styles, generating this unusual level of visual drift between the different dies. After this long rambling, going to the reverse, we have the astrological sign of the Capricorn. The Capricorn is a goat with a fish tail. Augustus used the iconography of the Capricorn more than any other astrological sign, but what I find curious is that his birthday was on the 23rd of September, so he was a Virgo. The preference for the sign was likely due to an appreciation on the part of Augustus to the attributes of the sign. The Capricorn is generally associated to authority, seriousness, which the Romans would call gravitas, directive power, all of the qualities one could expect from someone in charge of such a gigantic empire. The other symbols that accompanied the Capricorn were also on the coins to reinforce this theory. So if you see like the Capricorn, there's some symbols close to him. To its right, we have a globe, and under it there's a ship's rudder. The globe is the world. The rudder means that Augustus steers the world in the direction his authority designs. How strong, right? And finally over him, that twisted little thing there, it's a tiny little cornucopia, the magical horn of abundance. It shows that yes, Augustus had total power, but he was a virtuous leader, and his leadership was meant to bring prosperity and particularly abundance to Rome, which, let's face it, he actually largely accomplished during his reign. Now, let's head to another mint, to Lugdunum. This mint produced coins for a very long time. When Augustus reformed his monetary system and took control of the minting of silver and gold, he relocated the main imperial mint from Rome to Lugdunum, and it continued to operate until the reign of Nero. It was then closed for over 150 years, and then it was reopened during the 3rd century, striking coins until the fall of the Western Empire and serving as one of the most important Western mints. Let's start with this denarius, struck in 15 BC, the first coin issue of Augustus in the city. Notice how the style of the portrait is clearly different from those from Hispania. It's certainly the product of like a completely different die engraver, even if the concept of the image is basically the same, like this a bare-headed portrait of the emperor, in this case with the legends Augustus Divi Filius. Divi Filius means son of a god, of course, once again a reference to his adoption by Julius Caesar and the fact he was deified after his assassination. On the reverse, we have Apollo Actios. Remember I said the proper honoring of the gods was essential for any respectable Roman, particularly the emperor, right? Here's one of such cases. The most important victory of Augustus, which was that of over Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium, where he toppled his last remaining political opponent, and probably the most dangerous one. After all, Antony was very popular and he had much more experience than him. Augustus asked for the intervention of the god Apollo for his protection during the battle. After the victory, he even raised a temple to the god at the site where the battle took place. So what we have here is a denarius celebrating that victory. There's even an ACT, the abbreviation of Actium, at the exarch, the very bottom of the coin, in case someone did not get the hint from Apollo himself. The god is shown with a dress. He almost looks a bit feminine on this image, and he holds a lyre, one of his symbols, to help identify him, as he was also the god of music. To his left and right, we have the words Imperator Decimum, meaning that during this year, Augustus was holding for the 10th time the office of Imperium, that of military command, which had gave him the rights to command and the rights of life and death over his troops. The year this coin was made, 15 BC, Augustus was conducting campaigns in the Alps, an area that never had been fully pacified and controlled by Rome up to that time. This coin was most likely issued to help pay for the costs of the campaign. Alright, let's keep going. Now we have a piece struck between 11 and 10 BC. Nothing very different on the obverse. We once more have the bare-headed bust of Augustus looking to the right, with the legends reading Augustus Divi Filius. On the reverse, what a cool image, a charging bull, very aggressive. We can see Augustus has a few more years as Imperator in this coin. Now it's 12 instead of 10. When this coin was made, there was plenty of activity in the Germanic frontier. Augustus relegated to his general, Drusus, the task of making punitive incursions into Germania, and he would be very successful around the time these coins were minted. However, a few years later, in 9 BC, the famous disaster of the Teutoburg forest would happen, when around 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed at a massive ambush. And since we just mentioned the year 9 BC, here is our last denarius for today, which was issued during that year. On the obverse, we have a slight variation from the previous coin. Now Augustus is shown with a laurel crown, but the legends are the same as before: Augustus Divi Filius. And the reverse for this one is probably the highlight of today's coins. What a wonderful reverse. We have this dramatic scene of the emperor dashing forward on his horse. To make sure the idea of movement was passed in this image, the engraver chose to show the front legs of the horse off the ground, like if this was a picture taken at the exact moment Augustus ordered a cavalry charge. Really, really well thought out image, full of movement. The pose the emperor is also shows some congruency with the movement of the horse. He's leaning forward on his saddle to counteract the inertia of the sudden charge forward. And to his left, there is once again the military standards. This could either be once more a reference to the standards returned by the Parthians we discussed previously, or this was simply a complement to the militaristic scene on this reverse, just something to fill out the left part of the design. And you know what? From looking at the coins alone, you would have guessed Augustus was a man of action, like this soldier emperor. There are so many scenes of him in full battle gear, holding standards, on a horse like in this example. However, as we've seen, he was not the best soldier or general. It wasn't just that he wasn't a brilliant battlefield tactician, but most importantly, he wasn't particularly strong or vigorous. He wasn't a very strong man. He couldn't handle the harsh conditions of marching with his army very well. He was often sick. The fact he died at the ripe old age of 75 was quite surprising. Fortunately for him, he was blessed with very competent advisors, generals. He also had an eye for talent himself, well, maybe except for Varus, who walked right into that Germanic ambush in Teutoburg, losing Augustus 3 of his prized legions. So here we have it, Augustus, and his pretty amazing coins. Let me know what you think. Do you have a coin of Augustus? I know his pieces can get a little bit pricey. He's always in very high demand, and there are quite a few people who collect Augustus exclusively, but I think for anyone interested on Roman imperial coins, there's simply no way around it. You just need to have at least one coin of Augustus in your collection. Alright, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you really like this content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more ancient coin content. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon! Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.